go. So, Michael, I'm delighted to be having this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to be talking with you. So you're a transformative coach. You're a best-selling author of several books, including The Inside Out Revolution. And you're a Hay House radio presenter, as well as the founder of Supercoach Academy. So it would be great to hear a little bit about your story and how you found your passion for coaching.
How long you got? I'll do a potted version of the story. I come from a very loving, very intelligent family. Mm-hmm. So my mom was a PhD from the University of Brussels. My brother went to MIT I think he finished at 19. My sister graduated Harvard at 20. You know, that kind of family.
Yeah.
And I was always sort of the odd one out. Like I wanted to be an actor, you know, and yet I had the family brain. And so unfortunately in me, the brain didn't quite work the way that it did for everyone else. And that I suffered from depression very, very badly from about the age of 13, 14. And it got worse and I didn't have any context. My family, you didn't talk about stuff like that. You know, you reasoned your way out of it. What do you have to be depressed about? Well, nothing. Okay. And it got to the point where I think the polite term that they now have is, suicidal ideation. Which is that I thought about killing myself a lot. And at one point it kind of came to a head. And I realized in the aftermath of that, because I didn't actually, what happened was I called the suicide hotline because I sort of had enough about me and I got a busy signal. And there was something about that was so funny to me. It was like to me, that was God saving my life because I don't know that a person could have talked me down, but a busy signal from the suicide hotline was like, really? Okay. And what I realized the next day, and this does connect to your question because this is what sort of set me on the path was, I don't want to kill myself. I just think about it a lot. Because if I really wanted to, that night would have been the night.
Right.
And yet I actually did everything I could to not die. And I somehow seeing that it was my thoughts and not something more in that was life-changing for me. It opened up a space between me and my thinking that hadn't been there before. And so I got very interested in that. And I studied a lot of things, and I studied various spiritual traditions to see about meditation. And they were all interesting, but a bit weird for my background. And so I wound up getting into a field called Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP. And for many years, that was what I used to help myself. And just because it came naturally to me, I started working with other people, first as a therapist. And then after a couple of years of that, I realized I didn't like charging people who were desperate. But I also couldn't make my living not charging people. So what I did is I became a coach where you're helping people who already are okay have better lives. And then I would do some pro bono work on the side. And I did that for a number of years, but it was the best I had. But I was aware that at some level, what it had turned me into was a very high-functioning depressive. So I was high-functioning. I was happy. I was happily married. I got on well with my kids. I was good, but I worked so hard to be good. Like I worked so hard to be okay. I exercised and meditated and practiced and did all sorts of rituals and routines to try and be okay. I called it spiritual self-care. And I even have written a couple of my books. I've written about it at length now. But I kind of always knew I was 2 weeks away from a relapse. Like, not that I really thought I'd go 2 weeks without doing all of my behavioral Prozac, as I called it. But but that I was fine, but I was here, you know, and bad was here.
Right.
And it was around 2007 that I came across what I now teach, you know, which is sometimes called the 3 principles of the inside out understanding. And I somehow heard at a level way beyond the level you can say something like this, that everyone has innate mental health, that's the default. And I got it like you get a joke. I got it at the level of, oh, of course, as opposed to, oh, what an interesting idea. Let me see. Do they? It just went straight in somehow. And I realized, in a way to my dismay, partly to my relief, partly to my dismay, that I'd been working so hard to get something that I already had that was built into the system. And that, in fact, when I stopped working so hard to get it, it was more and more obvious to me that I had it, that it was already there. And I got to tell you, I de-aged about 5 years in that hour. But like all of that came off my mind. It was like that wasn't my problem anymore. And I went in that moment from being a fundamentally depressed person who had his up moments to being a fundamentally happy person who has his down moments. And you could have told me that as an NLPer. You could have said, no, reframe it. It's not this, it's this. And I would have thought, oh, that's clever. I'll play with that. But I saw that it was true. And for me, that's been the biggest shift in my work. I still work with very, very rich people, very, very successful people. I still work with people from all walks of life. But I came to see that the most useful conversation we could have was a conversation about what's true, not about a better way of seeing things, not about a more useful path. And that has transformed my life and work. And that's why I call what I do transformative coaching, because we're actually fundamentally pointing people towards something that transforms their experience of life. It doesn't make it better. I mean, it does make it better, but it doesn't just improve it. It fundamentally changes the basis for it. Mm-hmm. And that might or might not sound grandiose, but that's what my work is about. You know, I've been delighted over the last 6 years now, 7 years almost, not only experiencing it for myself, but watching my clients just soar.
Fantastic. And thank you for sharing some of your personal journey as well. I think to hear what you've been through yourself and how you've experienced a transformation in your own life is very inspiring.
I think it's relevant because I think otherwise what happens is people look at you and they go, well, it's okay for you. But you know what? It really wasn't okay for me for a very long time.
Right.
And the fact that it has been okay for me for a very long time is good too. Yeah. You know, and I see it. I don't have time for quite so much pro bono work anymore, but when I do, it's usually with troubled teens, young adults. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I can always say to them is, look, you know, I know it's really awful and it gets better, and it doesn't get better just because life gets better. Life might get worse for a while. But when you start to understand the nature of where your experience is coming from, that you're not living in your circumstances, you're living in the feeling of your thinking, that starts to free things up. And to take it a step further, I mean, this is what we'll talk about, but when you start to see that there's a deeper intelligence, a deeper energy that's available to you, that you're part of this larger system, it's not just that it gets better, it becomes a whole new thing. You know, you're not alone. You're not in this on your own. You don't have to be the one who figures it all out and makes it all work. You don't have to make the sun come up in the morning. You don't have to put the sun to bed at night. It's all there for you. And there's something when people start to see that for themselves that's really reassuring.
Yeah. I hear a certain sort of effortlessness in what you're describing. That's how it's coming across in this moment. Like, as you were saying, not having to try so hard or work so hard.
And that's what, one of the most popular products I ever put out was called Effortless Success.
Right.
And my agent at the time, well, still my agent, said, well, how can you call this Effortless Success? You do stuff. And I was like, yeah, of course you do stuff. The whole idea that you can succeed without doing anything, I don't quite get. But there's a big difference between doing what you do, what you want to do anyways, the sort of effortlessness of doing what's in front of you, and the struggle and the stress and the strain and the trying to get myself to do things that I don't want to do but are good for me or good for the business. You can, not only can you do it without all that, it actually goes better without all that.
Mm. So you talked a moment ago about the 3 principles of having this inside-out understanding. I'd love to hear a bit more about that, because this seems to be at the heart of your current work.
Well, and for me, when I first came across this, I wasn't interested in the 3 principles at all. I understand. Yeah, you got your 3 principles. That's great. Tell me about how I get the effortless success thing. Tell me about how I get to not be a miserable, depressed person, who works really hard to be up. Tell me about that. But actually, when I came to see, I almost think principles is the wrong word, because they're truths, the way I would talk about them. They're energies that are present that we don't often notice. They're constants in a world of change. Mm-hmm. They're energies that are available. They're gifts. I would almost use any word but principles is the word that we started with, so that's what we got.
Okay.
But the first constant, the first principle, the first energy is what we call the energy of mind. And I sometimes call it the God principle. Not because, like, there's this guy and I think he does this. I don't know about any of that. But everyone I know recognizes that we're part of this larger unfolding, that we're not the ones who are in charge of the game. We might be in charge of our little bit of the game, but even then, so much of what works or doesn't work isn't down to us. And when you start to see that not only is there a larger intelligence behind the unfolding, that acorns know to become oak trees. They don't have the debate that we all have at university about, now, do I want to be an oak tree or a pine tree, or, might I prefer to be a Christmas tree? They just know it's already, the blueprint's there.
Yeah.
And in a way, the gift and curse of being human is we have free will. So we can work with the unfolding of our blueprint, or we can work against it, but it's there. And I call that larger unfolding mind. And that's the first principle. Mm-hmm. That we're all part of this larger unfolding, and we can rely on it. And it will guide us if we let it. The second principle, the second thing that's always present is consciousness, which is the capacity that we have to experience life. And it's one of these things which is so sort of, I remember when I first heard it, I was like, okay, so we can experience life. That's a big deal. Right. Nobody else, as far as we know, gets that at the same level that we do. And not only do we get to experience life, we get to understand it. We get to have some perspective on it. We get to see behind the curtain and have a deeper understanding of life. And that's the second principle. So there's this life force, and then there's this capacity to experience this life force that we could call consciousness. And then we have this thing called thought. And thought is the thing that individuates our experience. So you've got the life force. And if all you had was the life force and consciousness, all you would experience was just pure light and love and light all the time. Just a oneness. And maybe that would be amazing, but that's not the gig. That's not the human gig. Right? We have thought, which means that we can use that life force. We can create a million different things out of that life force. First thing that gets created is us as a separate self, as a wave within the ocean of life. And then that wave takes on a life of its own, and we have all our thoughts about the world that create our experience and start to individuate things for us. And I mean, there are stories, I don't know if it's true, I used to like, when I was doing my spiritual study early on, the idea that human beings are here. We're life's way of experiencing itself. If you prefer, we're God's way of experiencing himself. Because how else could the oneness experience itself except by separating it out into parts? Now, when I first talk about that with people, if they don't have context for it, it can sound lovely, but a bit, so what? What I can tell you, the reason that I write books about it, the reason that I do programs, the reason that I haven't just said it, then I shut up and go watch TV, is because it turns out that everything that people want to do in their life is guided by these principles. They're underneath everything. And so when you start to see what's really going on, it just changes the way you approach things. And it makes it so much easier. And sometimes it becomes apparent to you that what you're doing, there's no point doing it. You just stop doing it. And that's why we have all sorts of people who have spontaneous remissions from illness and from addiction. I mean, we had 4 people in the last week write in from one of our online programs about just one stopping drinking, one stopping smoking, one stopping with another addiction. Simply not because we ever even talk about that, but because, I mean, it sounds silly maybe, but when you don't drink rat poison, you don't need the antidote.
Right.
When you're not driving yourself crazy with stress that seems to be coming at you from outside, but is actually a projection of your own thought to the world, you don't need whatever it is that you found for stress relief. Whether that's eating too much or drinking too much or smoking too much or whatever it might be. And on a business level, when you're in your clarity and well-being, when it doesn't look to you like every decision you make is life or death, and that you don't have a head full of thought about, I've got to figure this out, because you know that there's this wisdom behind the system. It'll give you just-in-time guidance if you let it. It just becomes so much more obvious what to do. You make less bad decisions. You make more good decisions. Of course you're going to do that. And kind of like you said earlier, there's something about even glimpsing these principles that I've just found is life-changing. It's transformational. And that's what I talk about.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Very clearly articulated, and it feels like you're going in this direction anyway. But let me ask the question. One of the things you say is that your coaching is a space in which miracles happen, and it would be great to just, what are some of the changes? I know that you're not going for any kind of transactional set of results, but what are some of the changes, some of the shifts that you've witnessed in people's lives as a result of your transformative coaching?
Well, it's funny because the ones that I get most excited about usually aren't the ones people hire me for. So nowadays, actually, people just kind of hire me to come along for the ride a lot of the time, which is perfect. Yeah. But a lot of times people will hire me because they do. They want to do better in their business with less stress. They want to, get the relationship side of their life working or something with their kids. I got a letter in the last month from a woman who, when she first came across this understanding, she had an autistic child and was really struggling, and he was prone to violence, and it looked like he might have to go into care. And she wrote, and that kid is now not even exhibiting most of the symptoms of autism. Now, I don't know. I'm not trying to make a claim because I didn't even work with the kid. The mom started to see this, and she started to share it with her own son. And he started to, whatever wasn't quite right in his brain, he could still start to see the truth of the spiritual nature of life, of what's behind what we think of as life, which is the doing and the striving, and the whatever thing. And so things like that, people who reach out to me, and I remember a client who, very successful executive, and just on a whim, about 6 weeks into her coaching, I asked her, I said, "Are you an alcoholic?" She hadn't said anything about it, but she burst into tears. For 20 years, it had been her secret. And, she's found her own way. And that's the beauty of this. People find their own way. I don't give a prescription because I don't have one. If I had one, maybe I would. I don't know. But I don't know how you should deal with your life. I don't think, top 7 tips for dealing with this and that, ironically, given how I used to write. I don't think they do people as much good as I used to think they do, because, the truth about advice is when you need it, you can't usually hear it. And when you're in a space where you can hear it, you don't usually need it. And so what I'm always trying to do with people, and I realize this isn't exactly answering the question, but is I'm trying to wake them up to something that's already inside them. There's a deeper potential inside people. So what excites me with my clients is when they wake up, when the light comes on in their eyes, when they start to get more reflective and more insightful, when the joy and the life energy starts really flowing through them. Because I know that will have a knock-on effect. I know that's going to transform their marriage. I know they're going to go out and take their business to another level if that's the game they're playing. Right. One of the things I was told years ago about that I ascribe to coaching. I heard of Dr. Richard Bandler. He was talking about NLP, but for me it applies to coaching. He said, our field is a metadisciplinary field. It's a field about other beings. Our job is to facilitate excellence in the performance of human beings, regardless of what they do. And I just find that nothing facilitates that excellence in the performance of human beings more than waking up to this deeper potential, to this deeper mind, and allowing it to come through more and more and more in your life and in your work. And so that's what thrills me.
In the sense that I'm getting listening to you is that you're accompanying people with them in their field, and that's allowing something greater, something bigger, something more expanded to unfold in their lives. And I'm wondering to what extent you think people need to have a coach, to have a companion or a mentor in order to be able to make some of these shifts. Is a coach necessary?
I think it depends. I think ultimately, my mom asks me this question all the time, by the way. She'll hear me on the radio and then she'll call. She doesn't call into the show, but she'll call me after a show and go, why do people pay you if it's inside them all the time? And the answer is because it's really hard for us to see backwards. It's really difficult for us to see in when our eyes are aimed out.
Right.
And so the value of a coach, Ali Campbell was one of my early students. He has a great expression. He talks about coaching as being the flashlight in the mirror. So it's a mirror that lets you see in, but it's also a flashlight to let you see into the unknown. And so it's the same kind of thing as like if you go to a museum or to a city you've never been to before, do you need a guide? Well, no, not technically. But will you get more out of the trip? Will you get where you want to go quicker with one? Usually.
Yeah.
And so I would never say to somebody this is necessary. I would say to people, boy, is it worth it. And that's what they say back to me is I am so glad that I was guided to do this. I'm so glad that we're doing this together. And, just before this call, I got off the phone with a business owner who handles hundreds of millions of pounds. And we talked a bit about business, but we mostly just talked about life. We talked about the nature of thought and how it can create panic or it can create peace. And it's kind of almost nothing to do with us. It's just chugging along in the background doing that. And that we don't have to be involved in that. We don't have to get caught up in it. And that when you relax into yourself, when you relax into this deeper mind, into this deeper seeing, it just comes through you. And, it doesn't matter what field somebody's in, what game they're playing, what level they're at. The same thing is true for everyone. And that's that for me, when I'm training coaches, like in Supercoach Academy or in other programs, that's one of the things I say to them is, look, we have a secret weapon. We're telling the truth. We're not trying to sell something. We're not trying to get people to believe something positive that if they believe it, it will be helpful to them. We're saying, look over here, look within, look to the nature of things, and see if you can see this, because it's there. And the great thing is, even when we do a clumsy job of pointing, because what we're pointing to is real, people invariably start to see it.
Yeah. We have good radar for sensing what's
Yeah.
real. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, look, I went in and into a maximum security prison over the summer to work with a group of gang members who read my book. They requested me to come in, and I brought my 19-year-old son with me. And somebody asked me before I went in there, well, what are you going to talk to all these guys about? What do you have in common with them? And I went up in my head and started thinking, yeah, what am I going to talk to these guys about? I don't know. And then I realized, oh, wait, they're human. And if they're human, that means that they think, and they experience their thinking as if it's real, and they feel their thinking. They have consciousness, which means that the life will look a certain way to them. But in any moment, they're one thought away from it looking much, much simpler than it probably looks to them now. And they're part of this larger mind too. They're just as much a part of God as I am or any other of my clients are. So why would it matter what their circumstances are as to whether this conversation is relevant? And that's exactly how it went. We had a beautiful conversation for a couple of hours. And they saw what I saw. They had different language for it sometimes. But we're pointing to something that is universal and is true. And that's what's so exciting about it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And thank you for this conversation as well, which I have found very inspiring. And I'm thinking of our listeners, and if they would like to find out more about you and the work you do and the coaching that you offer, where can they go for more information?
The place to go is supercoach.com, and that's our invitation. And it's going through a lot of changes right now because we're trying to bring more of this message onto the page. But they can get free tips. They can listen to radio shows. There's videos. We make a ton of stuff available through that because we just really want people to see it. Because this is my best guess at what's going to change the world. Is the more people that start to see this, it will lead to a shift in consciousness. And when people see differently, they do differently.
Very exciting. Well, thank you for all your generosity and your wisdom. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.